Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to a special edition of the Sooner Tailgate Show. My name is Jason Ray, taking you live for the next hour or so, or however long the comments and the questions last. So feel free to jump on in here. Make sure you guys will hit that like, hit the subscribe button, so you know that when we're going to go live. Like yesterday, when we had to pivot a little bit, so my apologies for that. Kind of work situation got in the way, so I was not able to meet the 3 p.m. requirement. So, but anyways, welcome in. Make sure you, like I said, hit that like and subscribe button so you know if we do make some changes, and then also make sure that you just share this with a friend, specifically as we get into football season. We're 1 week away from toe meeting leather from a football perspective, as next week we get cranked up and get kick-started. There's a couple of high school games locally in the Tulsa area. Bixby and Owasso kick off on Thursday night to start everything, and then there's a full schedule of games on Friday that we'll probably get into a little bit next week, and then certainly the week 0 games, and then obviously in 2 weeks Oklahoma kicks off the 2023 campaign at 11 a.m. Inside Gaylord Family Memorial Stadium against Arkansas State. So obviously more to come on that. We'll do a big preview as far as that goes. But for today, I don't have a big time agenda for us. I just wanted to kind of talk through whatever's on your mind. Any Q&A that you guys have, certainly it could be about if we want to talk recruiting. Certainly we can talk through that and kind of what that means. And I know everybody is probably tired of talking about Williams-Nori, and then the whole Twitter war, OU beat war that happened on top of that. But any questions that you guys have that we can talk through from a recruiting perspective, certainly we'll be willing to do that. Any questions that you guys have about fall camp and any particular position, any players, anything that you want to talk in terms of teams, schedules, anything like that. I've got a few things, but certainly we can talk through whatever you choose at this point. And it doesn't necessarily have to be football related. Anything. There's a little bit of softball news, kind of on the negative side from an Oklahoma State perspective that we can talk through. Any softball just related discussion that you guys want to have, that's always welcome. Basketball, baseball, anything that you guys want to talk about. This is your show. This is your show today on the Sooner Tailgate Show. So just a couple of things. First and foremost, make sure that you guys follow me on X/Twitter at JasonRay1. I think Mark had teased this a little bit. I believe it was last Saturday when he had a live show where he talked about the new SEC and Big 12 channels that have already been, unveiled and kicked off. So make sure you guys are going and checking that out for the SEC channel, youtube.com/at SECVOCFB, and then Big 12, the same thing exists for the Big 12. youtube.com/at Big 12 VOCFB. A lot of good stuff that we'll do, a lot of simulcast stuff. And obviously for Oklahoma heading into the SEC next year, and then certainly the Big 12. I know there's, as we continue to go on past this year, I know that there's going to be a lot of interest just in terms of Oklahoma obviously going into the SEC, but then I think there still will be a lot of interest in Big 12 from Oklahoma Sooner fans as we get into that, and so we will get those simulcasts, and make sure you guys go give those a like and subscribe as well as we continue to go through. And as we've talked about, we will continue this our Oklahoma post game live at the Voice of College Football after every single Oklahoma football game this year. Probably will get cranked up around 2:30 to 3 o'clock time frame in a couple of weeks for our first post game show, and then we will. So as I mentioned, we'll continue to do that each and every week as we go forward throughout the season. And obviously Friday will be more of kind of a preview type of situation, and then we will. I think next week we'll get into I'll have some predictions just for the overall season record wise, and then we'll talk about some of my maybe some bold predictions for the team and overall across college football. So be ready for that, and make sure you're tuned in next week. So we've got 14 people on the line, so make sure you guys are tuned in and all that good stuff, and make sure that you guys are sharing that. So on X and things like that, so we get some more folks in here. All right, thanks for the question, poor boy. So any word on McKinley? So I think Oklahoma's still in the mix for Dominic McKinley. I think there's a little bit of a Texas probably has a lead at this point for McKinley. I saw a couple of future casts in for Texas this past week. Right now, I think Texas probably has a pretty sizable lead. Not to say that Oklahoma can't get back in it, but certainly I think McKinley is. Unfortunately, at this point, the tea leaves seem to be going in the favor of the Longhorns here. So, Boomer Sooner, Clint. So let's talk a little bit about the. I know that it's been a while, so I think maybe the taste is out of our mouths to a certain degree. But let's talk a little bit about the Nwaneri situation. So, and I know that you guys that follow recruiting very closely, some of you may have subscriptions to OU Insider, Sooner Scoop, On Three, whatever it might be. And I think the thing to take away from all of this is, when it comes to 17-year-old kids, you just really never know. You never really know until the end, what he's going to do, he, she, whoever it is, what they're going to do, where they're going to go. And so I think, there's a lot of people throwing Parker under the bus, a lot of people throwing a lot of the people that were close to this, under the bus. I think I said out of the bus, under the bus to a certain degree. And so I think number one, to remember is that Oklahoma is not going to break the bank, so to speak, on an individual player. And from what I understand and from what I've heard, Nwaneri received an offer from Missouri that he literally just could not refuse. And so I think, and this is where we get in this. And I think there's a certain degree of people, and I'm not completely there, but I think there's a certain degree of people that really believe that the NIL era is really just ruining college football. And I think it's, I think to some degree it is. It's changing the game. It's changing the recruiting game. It's changing the transfer portal. It's changing all of that. But I think the thing that you have to, if you're an Oklahoma fan, Nwaneri was like really kind of the icing on the cake. So I think there's a couple others, obviously, that Oklahoma fans will want to make sure that they've got their eye on. David Stone obviously is the big one. He's going to commit next Saturday. Again, I think there's a lot of positive spin for Oklahoma with David Stone. From what I've heard, that he's probably over the last couple of years, he's probably been on campus, no less than about 14 to 15 times. So I think you never. I think after some of these recruitments over the last couple of years, you can never take anything to the bank and say that. But I still like where Oklahoma sits with David Stone. I think Miami's the biggest hurdle with him. I would say at this point, I don't know that Michigan State's in the battle. Michigan State's there, but I don't know that they're really a big time threat. So I really think it's Oklahoma and Miami here. Miami probably doesn't have some of the clout from an NIL that they have before. I think on this one, just to be completely blunt and honest, I think Mama Stone and some of the family are pushing Miami really, really hard here. So I think his preference all along has been Oklahoma and will continue to be Oklahoma. So there's nothing that I've heard at this point. Now we're up to the week of almost the week of his announcement. So, I think there's going to be wild rumors and things like that that will continue to kind of surface this week and up until his announcement. So I think at this point, you like where Oklahoma's at. You really do. And I think he's a must get if for some reason this slips through the cracks for Oklahoma and they miss on both David Stone and Nwaneri, then I think there's maybe a little bit of cause for concern on, what does Oklahoma have to do to be able to get some of these big time 5-star defensive linemen. But I think as it sits right now, I still feel pretty solid about where Oklahoma was at with David Stone. Nigel Smith is another. He's not quite a 4-star, but he's a 5-star, but he is a 4-star. Really, really good player. And again, we'll see. I think Oklahoma's in a very good spot for him right now as well. So those are the two that I feel really good about, without a doubt. I think his commitment was to appease his parents. He still wants to come to OU. It's hard to say. I know there was some scuttlebutt a couple of days ago when he was, he was wearing some OU gear. I think, I don't really think that Oklahoma's still in the mix. I think the one thing that, a lot of people thought, and, of course, everybody gets bad information from time to time. So I don't think that's really anything to throw anyone under the bus on. But I do think that a lot of us felt like Oklahoma was going to be the choice. And as it turns out, it looks like Oklahoma, finished third. So I don't know that he necessarily still wants to come to Oklahoma. Now, I think obviously his parents were very instrumental in wanting him probably to go to Missouri because of all the because of the NIL package that he got was, unbelievable. And so, like I said, it's something that Oklahoma, it was not that they are unwilling to compete at that level, but I don't know that Oklahoma was really willing to throw down the type of money, that Missouri threw down. And I think the other thing to kind of think of, as far as that goes is, at one point there was players that were getting, NIL $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 to come play, but now it's getting to the point where it's just so ridiculous that it is starting to be a situation where some of these kids are making as much as they are at the next level. Not the big time kids, but some of your 5-star kids are making some of the same money that they would make at the next level. And so I think there's, to a certain degree, the rich get richer. Now, I don't know that you would always consider you would throw Missouri into that loop as into that whole conversation as one of the richer teams in college football. I think when you think of that, you think of Georgia and Alabama and Texas A&M and a lot of the blue bloods. But yeah, I absolutely think it was just something that he wouldn't be able to he just wouldn't be able to pass up. Daryl, thanks for joining in. We are Oklahoma. I agree, absolutely. And I agree with you. It's kind of to the what I've always done, and watching football with friends and family. A lot of people. I do the best that I can to try to separate the two, in terms of looking at. I love the game for the game. Yes, I absolutely hate what NIL is doing. In a certain degree, right? I do very much agree that kids should be compensated to a certain degree for what they have to do or what they're going through and things like that. If it's true name, image, and likeness. But I think we all know we're in a situation now, really, where it's more of a legalized pay for play. And so until some sort of legislature comes down, which essentially gives teams a cap on the amount of money that they can use, or the amount of money that can be used towards a player that enrolls at your school, I don't think that we're going to see this end anytime soon. Because, these kids, and you don't blame for anyone that's, pointing the finger or blaming Nwaneri or the family or anything like that. I don't think it's one of those situations where you can really do that, because if we all think back, and maybe there's some 17-year-old kids here, but if we all think back when we were 17, 18 years old, if we're being offered and I don't know exactly what it is, I'm just going to say a number here. If we're being offered multi-million dollars just to go enroll at a school, there's no bearing on how successful you are, but this is the amount of money that you're being given to go to this school. It's hard to say no. It's hard to say no for that, for that type of kid. And when I say that type of kid, just anyone coming in, especially, and I don't know anything specifically, never met the kid, heard him talk for the first time the other day when he had an interview, after his little scrimmage. But I don't know if it's a situation where he needs the money, parents need the money, or anything like that. But no matter if they need the money or if they don't, it's still a situation where you just can't blame the kid. So it is what it is. I think, again, I think it's one of those things that I think you can be frustrated if you're an Oklahoma fan, be frustrated with the fact that, this is another 5-star kid that Oklahoma was not able to get. But I think at the same time, let's make sure that we keep this in perspective, and look and see what Oklahoma has. As Jimmy has mentioned here, absolutely move on from Nwaneri. I'm sorry, I'm never going to, hopefully we can move on for this so I don't have to pronounce his name that much anymore. And then I even forgot about Okoye. Yeah, but I think right now, as it speaks, I think Oklahoma leads for all three of those. Stone, Okoye, and Nigel Smith. I believe Nigel Smith's recruitment, and I don't have it right here on the top of my head here, but I'm sorry, Nigel Smith is September 1st. I don't believe that Okoye has set a date at this point. But yeah, I mean, I think Oklahoma has made a big time impression on Danny Okoye, the Tulsa Noah product here, locally out of Oklahoma, and Oklahoma's recruited the state of Oklahoma very, very well this year. So yeah, I think that'll be interesting. A couple of others to kind of think about as Oklahoma's kind of, I say, getting down the stretch. We still got 4 months, almost 3 months, and some change before early signing day. I mean, Grant Bricks is one to keep your eye on. You'd like to see him kind of make a date announcement sometime soon. If it gets too much into the season, you kind of worry about Oklahoma maybe not being able to get out there to him as much, or vice versa. I think Eli Bowen is in a good spot for Oklahoma, between Oklahoma and Texas. I think Oklahoma is going to be the place there. Tulsa Union product, Devon Jordan, and it is there, and I think he's probably leaning towards Oklahoma right now. But anyway, still a lot of good guys out there to get in terms of targets and things like that. But yeah, next Saturday is going to be big. I think maybe all hope is not going to be lost if you're an Oklahoma fan. If the Sooners are able to secure the commitment of David Stone, if David Stone goes elsewhere, Miami, wherever it might be, then maybe we're having another conversation here. But we will see how that goes. And yeah, hope for the best. But Venables and team has had a great, done a great job on the recruiting trail over the last couple of years. Obviously, last year landing a top 5 recruiting class, number 4 overall, and then the previous year really just being able to salvage that last bit of that recruiting class as well, for sure. Chris, thanks for joining, man. I appreciate you jumping in. Found out a few weeks ago that Chris and I are that he's a big fan. Knew we were colleagues at our job, but good to see Chris on here. Dan, thanks for the comment here. Oklahoma spends $60,000 per player average, which is in top 5 in the country. It's not always all about NIL. Missouri probably spent half their NIL budget. Yeah, they're spending just a massive amount of NIL on a couple of kids, the Wingo kid as well. But it's just one of those perfect storms. Missouri has a lot of really good, really big time talent in the state of Missouri this year, and they're capitalizing on that. Absolutely. Yeah. Oklahoma Sooner, thanks for joining. Nigel Smith is going to be a beast. Would love to see him have a better college career than Northern. Yeah, and I think some of these kids, Sooner, you really just never know exactly what how they're going to pan out. You've seen some kids flop, even some big time kids that Oklahoma has had flop, and so you have a pretty good idea from what that looks like. But yeah, I've heard, from his video, watching his video and stuff, and I've heard many other Oklahoma people and just national people think that Nigel Smith is probably really has 5-star talent, but is still right at that 4-star. So yeah, I think he's going to be a big time player for, and he's the one that I continue to hear out of all of them, all the guys, that Oklahoma is probably in a much better spot than even maybe David Stone for Nigel Smith. So things can fluctuate. There's still a couple of weeks there, but yeah, I like where Oklahoma's at there. Poor boy, thanks for the softball question. Love that. Could you speak on who you would like to see commit in 9-1? I'll give you. There's quite a few. I'll give you one name. Sophia Bordy is the probably, depending on who you look at, number 2, number 3 overall recruit in that 2025 class. I like where Oklahoma sits. I think it's probably a 3, at least maybe a 2-team race. I think Oklahoma and UCLA are really in the mix, both of those really competing for her. But she is, she's one of those that's going to be able to pitch and hit without a doubt. So I think she is the next big time commit, sort of in the Jordy Ball mode in terms of being able to just such a really good athlete, being able to hit and pitch as well. So that's probably the one that I would mention. Poor boy. He'll definitely get better coaching. Not quite sure. Are you talking about? I'm not quite sure what that comment is specifically to who. Hey, I think it's Michigan Man Jason. Sorry. Thanks for joining in. I love to see the fans from other schools. Really, I'm really big on your team this year. Having said that, also very NIL is ruining college football. We've lost several 5-stars because of it. Yeah, it's just it's unfortunate. There's not an equal playing field. I think that's the thing that I struggle the most with NIL and a lot of this stuff is it's not an even playing field. Certain teams have more of an advantage, and I think inherently you're going to see that in sports, specifically collegiate sports. I mean, Tulsa is in the same division as Oklahoma. Tulsa's never going to compete for a national championship. There could be a crazy, crazy year where they could sneak into the college football playoff, but they're never going to actually compete for a national championship. So, you have to take that with a grain of salt a little bit, but it's, for this particular situation, it's not an equal playing field. Jimmy, yeah, Boganowski is another one. I haven't heard a ton about him as of late. I think he's he's being quiet a little bit. So, from some of the things I've heard about Boganowski is if Oklahoma gets a sense that this is going to be a long recruitment. He's not going to commit for a while, and I think Oklahoma could potentially move on. Maybe not necessarily move on, but also give some more kids some offers that they're looking at. So I think I wouldn't be. Anyway, I'll keep my ear to the ground, but I haven't heard a whole lot on Boganowski as well. So. Anything else you guys got on recruiting? We'll certainly talk through that, but we're getting close to the season. We're going to kind of start shifting away a little bit from recruiting talk and start talking about the season in itself. So I'll kind of talk a little bit about fall camp here, and you guys can give me your kind of your synopsis or any questions that you want to have about it, or you want me to go in depth about a specific position a little bit more. Let's do that now here for the rest of the time. And so I think when you before we get that, I've got just one last little comment here from Michigan man Jason. Michigan refused to pay kids up front. That's why they're losing them. Like Michigan's approach to NIL, you can make a lot by performing on the field. Oklahoma is making $260K a year. Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. Completely agree. Jimmy, thanks for the question. Who will be our number one wide receiver? And so that's a very, very interesting question. I think, from some of the things that I'm hearing, the wide receiver group may be performing a little bit better than what we thought they would be. The name that I really continue to hear over and over and over again is Gavin Freeman. I think he has a chance to be probably the most improved player on the team overall. From last year to this year, with him and Drake Stoops are sort of kind of the same type, same position. I mean, Gavin Freeman has a little bit more, certainly top end speed about him, but and I'll just kind of say, Jimmy, some of the names that I continue to hear good things about over and over again through fall camp is Gavin Freeman. Here you're starting to hear a lot of good things in terms of consistency from Nick Anderson. I think he's caught a touchdown pass in each of their two scrimmages. They're having their final, I believe, having their final fall camp scrimmage today as school starting here pretty soon. I believe next week. Then they'll start getting into more Arkansas State and game prep and stuff like that. So those two are two that I've continued to hear. Jaquays Petaway is another one that continues to be a name. I haven't heard a ton really just from Jalil Farouk, but I think that's probably because he's just very consistent in terms of what that looks like for him. And then obviously you've seen the consistency, you've heard about the consistency of Andrell Anthony. So if I had to just, and I'm kind of, and this isn't not necessarily like what the depth chart will look like in terms of who's out there for the first team, but I think right now I would say, and not necessarily any particular order, your top 5 receivers at this point are probably, starting to separate themselves just a little bit. And I think I like Jalil Farouk, Gavin Freeman, Drake Stoops, Nick Anderson, Andrell Anthony, and Jaquays Petaway. I think I mentioned 6 there. That's the 6 that I think you'll right now. And of course, you've got some other ones like, that could potentially make their way. Brendan Thompson is one, the transfer from Texas that could really could get in there in terms of being able to be part of that. Jaden Gibson is another as well. So I think there's a lot more. The good thing is, and this is very consistent across the board, there's a lot more consistency in terms of what that looks like for Oklahoma at the wide receiver position, as much more than it was a year ago. Oklahoma student who starts opposite Woody Washington. I think that's going to be something that's going to be a continued debate, competition, things like that. So the thing that I've heard about the secondary is, and I don't know that this is necessarily negative, but I think the secondary, I think a lot of us kind of going into fall camp, and particularly myself, had really viewed the secondary as one of the strengths of this team, and one of the best secondaries that Oklahoma has had in quite some time. And while I think that can still be true, the early returns are a little bit of inconsistency in the back end. I think there was the first scrimmage. There was quite a few big plays made by the wide receivers, and I think they got it settled in a little bit. I think that was maybe a little bit more towards um, towards the defensive line, really kind of dominating that second scrimmage. But I think it's Gentry Williams right now is the guy that I think you've got a couple of guys that are really in the mix. Josiah Wagner, I think, really has an opportunity to play a lot. I don't know if he'll be a starter, but has an opportunity to play a lot. You've got the junior college transfer, Kendall Dolby. I think he's in the mix as well. Makari Vickers, I don't know how much in the mix he will be, for a starting role, but would not be surprised to see him certainly get some run right there. But I think that's going to be a really good competition, not only to week 1 against Arkansas State, but I think that'll continue to be a good competition as far as that goes. I think when you look at holistically looking at the secondary, as a unit, you've got two starters that are set in stone, potential guys that could be all Big 12 performers. When you think of Woody Washington and Billy Bowman, those are the two guys that you feel really good about. And then you've got a couple of guys in terms of starters that we'll kind of see what that looks like, right? You have as I mentioned about the other cornerback position, probably Gentry Williams to lose at this point here and now as we talk on August 19th, but that competition will be fierce. Then the other safety position, you've got probably Reggie Pearson, who's that starter, but I think Peyton Bowen's in the mix there. And then you look at nickel. What does that look like? Is that Peyton Bowen? Is that Key Lawrence? What does that look like in terms of who's your nickel? And then I think you got the cheetah position, which is going to be interesting. I think you've got kind of a co-situation at cheetah, where I think we'll see Justin Harrington be that starter very much in like predictable passing situations, and then you got Deshaun McCullough that will probably be that guy from a run game cheetah perspective. So it'll be very interesting to see how Venables and does the best that they can to kind of get the best 11 guys on the field at the same time in the right situations. And so, like I said, that'll be real. I mean, McCullough's a little bit better at the point of attack, tall, 6'5", 6'6" kid. Very aggressive, very physical. So I think he's good to have around the line of scrimmage. And then Harrington's probably a little bit better in terms of his coverage skills and one-on-one tackling and things like that in the open field. So, I think again, I don't know that I would say this is a bad sign necessarily just yet, but the inconsistencies that that I hear through fall camp is maybe a little bit concerning, but at the same time, you always have to remember that having an improved pass rush and a much improved defensive line is something that's going to be counted on to make that secondary even better. Anthony, Michigan, thanks for the comment. Anthony is a good one. You guys got a gamer. Wish he would have stayed at Michigan, but I understand why he left. Yeah, it was kind of interesting. And, I don't know all the intricacies of Anthony there, but it seemed like he got a little bit lost in the depth chart. Obviously, he's really well known for that long touchdown catch that he had against Michigan State, I believe, a couple years ago. But yeah, certainly he's a guy that's going to be able to stretch the field a little bit for Oklahoma, I think, this year, and certainly something that they need. Obviously, the Marvin Mims loss really didn't have Oklahoma with a guy that can really stretch the field. Now you've got a few, that are really in that mix and something like that. And the one guy, there's another guy at the wide receiver core that I'm very interested in seeing, and there's not a whole lot of talk about him. And I hadn't heard really a word about him this fall. But DJ Graham, he has just elite athleticism and really good ball skills, as we saw from when he was at the cornerback position. And I think he is, he's a guy that could potentially, get some playing time, but I haven't heard really anything. It's difficult to make that position change, but I haven't heard a ton about him. But his athleticism just probably would allow him to do some good things for Oklahoma, this year if the opportunity presented itself. So I saw this on a couple of podcasts. While kind of go through this as well and name maybe a position group that's a little bit more disappointing, that I'm worried about, and then maybe one that I think I'm going to be pleasantly surprised on. One on the offensive side, one on the defensive side. I think the tight end position is the one that probably worries me the most offensively. I think you've got Austin Stogner, who is clearly the starting tight end there in that area. But he has a couple of surgeries. He's a little bit older than he was when he was here. But I worry a little bit about our depth there. So I wonder. I mean, from what I've been told, Oklahoma doesn't really have an Oklahoma level player at the tight end position outside of Stockner right now. Now, I think that there's a little bit to that. I think Jason Llewellyn could serve as a much better blocking tight end when he's healthy. Caden Helms is more of a receiver, but I think they've both have been banged up and a little bit unhealthy here early on. So I think you've got Stogner and Blake Smith are probably the two guys. But anyways, that's what I've heard. Just the tight end position is really been a little bit of a struggle, and don't just haven't really heard just a ton about that. So just in terms of guys that really could play this year, for Oklahoma at the tight end position. Jimmy, thanks for the comment. I had not heard that about DJ Graham. So interesting. Thanks for that. So I think that'll put his development back a little bit. Obviously, wasn't aware of that, but thanks for sharing. It just wasn't getting utilized enough. Yeah, and I think he'll get a lot of utilization at Oklahoma here. So, but I do think that Oklahoma will probably, to your point, Michigan man here, I think Oklahoma's going to run the ball a little bit more. I think part of the offensive line, I think, has an opportunity to be a little bit better than they were a year ago. I think the five starters are fairly entrenched. I think at this point, would be surprised if there's a straggler among that. So I think from left to right, you've got Walter Rouse is going to have one of the tackle spots. I got Savion Byrd at the guard, then Andrew Ream at the center, McKay Matauer at the other guard, and then Tyler Guyton at the tackle position. And so I think some of the things that we've seen early on in fall camp is that the offensive line has struggled just a little bit to open the game, open the two scrimmages, but then they've really performed very well as the scrimmages have gone on. And so I think that's something to note, that typically in Bill Bedenbaugh's offensive lines, it takes them a little bit to gel and to have that cohesiveness. But I think the one thing that might be a little bit different this year is you got those guys that have really been there's not a ton of what I would call really big competition between some of those guys. So I think early on even Jeff Lebby had talked about 4 of the 5 starters were pretty much entrenched, outside of Savion Byrd and but I think he's that guard spot. So I think he's really come on. Now there's a little bit of concern from a depth perspective there on the offensive line, but I think you've got some guys like Caleb Schaefer who could play some minutes, if needed. If Oklahoma was able to get Jacob Sexton back from his ACL tear in the bowl game against Florida State last year as sort of that swing tackle support. But yeah, I think outside of that, you've got Caden Green, he's a true freshman. I think he's going to play some this year, one way or the other, right? But I'm a little bit cautiously optimistic about the offensive line that could be better. And then you've got the stable of running backs that Oklahoma has. So I think that allows Oklahoma to maybe rely on the run game, maybe a little bit more than what they did a year ago, and play a little bit more ball control. Because, I think at the end of the day, this 6-7 record that Oklahoma had, 5 of these games were lost by a touchdown or less. So, you've got, in many instances, you've got 6 to 7, anywhere from 3 to 7 points of a kind of a margin for error there in some of those games. So, even the little things make the difference. Even if this team isn't just dramatically improved, which I'm not saying that that's the case, but even if they're not dramatically improved over what they were a year ago, you just have to be a little bit better. I think the 6-7 record was a little bit, I don't know that I would say smoke and mirrors, but I think that, you make a couple of different plays down the stretch. And I think the things that they've done and will continue to do will allow them, to be more successful late in games. So I think that will be very intriguing to watch, I think, for Oklahoma this year. Just in terms of I mentioned this a second ago. I mentioned the secondary as not anything that I was really down on, but just maybe an area that's maybe not quite as maybe good as a lot of us thought. And so I'll kind of do the flip side on a position that, that I'm hearing that is going to be maybe a little bit better than we thought that they might be, and I'm going to go with the defensive line. The things that I continue to hear on how deep that they are and how well they're performing in some of these scrimmages and things like that is very positive. I think they've got a good rotation at the tackle position with, when you look at Dejon Terry, I think he's going to get a lot of run, probably one of your starters. You've got Isaiah Coe, you've got Kelly, you've got a lot of guys in there that will be able to, I think, hopefully provide them, but I think that the biggest part of it is going to be the pass rush. I think you've got 3 or 4 really good pass rushers that will be able to make a difference. More so than they were a year ago. Oklahoma was, one of the worst teams in the Big 12 and sacks. And so I think getting Oklahoma to a place where what they really need to do is, put a lot of pressure on the quarterback. Everybody knows that Venables' defense is pretty aggressive in a lot of ways. And so, if you're aggressive in the way that you play, in the way that you blitz and things like that, and you're not able to get home to the quarterback, that really just it doesn't bode well for your back end. So you got to be able to play complementary football. And I think you've got Bothroyd, the transfer from Wake Forest, is probably your most consistent pass rusher, and I think maybe there's some eyebrows raised when you think about, oh, we got a guy from Wake Forest that's going to be the best pass rusher. But when you think through that, um, he's had double-digit sacks combined over the last couple of years at Wake Forest. And, I think he's a guy that's going to continue to be successful and really positive for Oklahoma this year. Trace Ford is another guy that is going to be very situational in how he plays, but you can see, now that he's a little bit more healthy, you can see exactly how good, if he can get back to where he was when he was with Oklahoma State. Will be very interesting. And then and then you look at R. Mason Thomas, and then I think he will be good. Then Ethan Downs as well. So I think those four, give you a really good opportunity to have a much, much better pass rush than you did a year ago. And so, yeah, I mean, I think, I've said this several times, and please feel free to provide some questions or comments related to this if you want. I think this is one of the biggest seasons that Oklahoma has had in the last 10 years, and I think some people may raise their eyebrows at that a little bit and say why would that necessarily be? Now, so there's not as much. There's a lot of pressure. I think there's not a whole lot of pressure in terms of being able to play for a championship or win a national championship or anything like that. But I do think you coming off of a 6-7 season, you're 1 year away from going into a much, much more difficult conference than you're sitting at right now. Then this year has to be a good one. I think with the schedule that Oklahoma has, anything less than 9-3, then you think there's pressure. There's going to be some big time pressure next year on Venables, and so I think this team. Now, don't get me wrong. I do think I'm still debating. I think very likely 10-2 is where this team ends up. But if you go 9-3 or worse, then we all know, yes, you going from 6-7 to, let's just say, 8-4, below 9-3. I'm just saying that on the negative end of that. If you go 8-4, yes, it's a better season than 6-7, but that's not the standard at the University of Oklahoma. That's not what's going to keep you hired. So if Oklahoma is less than 9-3, then you look at a situation where there's question marks going into 2024 in terms of is Brent Venables the right guy for the job at Oklahoma? Is he able to do the things that they need to do, or is he just a solid recruiter and a solid defensive guy, a la John Blake? Now, I don't think that that's the case. I think this schedule that Oklahoma has is set up in such a way that Oklahoma will go 9-3, 10-2. Are there some pitfalls in this schedule? Certainly. I mean, just going through the schedule, Arkansas State should be a layup for the most part, right? Arkansas. I mean, I don't know. I think the spreads are already out. Oklahoma's a 30+ point favorite. Arkansas is not a great FBS mid-major team. Okay, then you got SMU coming to town. SMU will be able to put some points on the board, so I think that'll be a big-time test for maybe not a big-time test, but a good, solid test for Oklahoma's defense in week 2. Then you go to Tulsa in week 3 again, somewhere in between the two. Probably not as bad as Arkansas State, but definitely not as good as SMU. I think Tulsa, with Kevin Wilson coming in as the head coach there, I think it there's a lot of turnover for Tulsa, so it kind of remains to be seen. There, then you go to Cincinnati and host Iowa State. It's your first two Big 12 games. This team should be 5-0. They need to be 5-0 going into Texas, and because quite frankly, Texas is going to be the only one as it sits right now. The lines and point spreads and all that stuff will change as the season goes on, but Oklahoma is going to be more talented. They are going to be a favorite in every game except for Texas this year. Just let that sink in for a minute. So if we're thinking a team is more talented and will be favored, and they were to go 8-4 outside of some major injuries, then I think conventional wisdom and common sense would come into play and know that it's a deflating year for Oklahoma. So I think you take that into consideration. Then when you look at the back half of the season, you've got some games that Oklahoma's that are going to be a little bit tricky, right? I mean, UCF at home. I think there's going to be some emotion there from both sides. With DG, but I think that's one that could be an interesting game. Then you look at some, potential road games that could be troublesome. At Kansas is going to be much improved. Obviously, they were much improved last year, but then they're going to continue to be much improved as well. Jalen Daniels is one of the best, if not the best, quarterback in the Big 12. Not sure how much better they're going to be defensively, but they're going to be able to put some points on the board. You go to Oklahoma State. I think Oklahoma State's going to be down this year from a talent perspective and what they're bringing to the table. But at the same time, it's still Bedlam. It's going to be the last Bedlam for quite some time, at least. They're gonna put everything that they have into that game. Oklahoma goes to BYU late in the season. Not sure. I think that is the most predictable game for Oklahoma to lose on the road late in the season. So that'll be interesting, and you never know what the weather will be like in Utah at that point in the year. And then you've got TCU at home to finish the season. So I think again we'll go game by game and I'll go through my predictions as we go through it next week. But 9-3, 10-2 is really where this team needs to be. So as we start to wrap it up, just one thing I wanted to touch on, and as we get into January, we'll start talking a lot more Sooner softball on here, and we'll get that cranked up as well. And I think Friday is going to be a good time to do that on the Sooner Tailgate show, because we'll be able to preview a lot of these weekend tournaments and weekend series and stuff like that. But there's not really a ton of news except for I think a lot of you probably have seen this. Anybody that does follow softball to a certain degree saw that Oklahoma State head coach Kenny Gajewski came out for the first time publicly since Callie Maxwell had committed to Oklahoma, and really had some surprising and really, frankly, disappointing. If I'm an Oklahoma State fan, very, very disappointing comments. For those of you that didn't see it, basically he threw her under the bus to a certain degree, basically saying that since she chose to go to Oklahoma, she really wouldn't be welcome back as long as he was there. Didn't really so far as to say she's dead to me, but the fact. So anyways, very surprising as a head coach to come out and say that. Now, if you're an Oklahoma State fan and you feel that way, then absolutely, I can get behind that. I think a lot of us OU fans would maybe feel similarly if an OU player transferred to OSU. But as a head coach, and I take myself into that consideration as I coach high school basketball, but as a coach, I couldn't imagine throwing a player, no matter where she went, he or she went under the bus like that, and basically saying that she would never be welcome back, and you know don't really wish her any success, and all of these things that he said. So, you know, over the years, I've thought that he was a really, really good coach. He's an OU alum, was part of the 1994 national championship team, worked for the Oklahoma athletic department for a while before he went to Florida, and then eventually to Oklahoma State. Has really done a good job at Oklahoma State there. Maybe not necessarily this past year as well, but in previous years did really, really well. But lost a ton of respect for him as a head coach, as a person, as someone that's mentoring a lot of these college kids. Again, he's a guy that I would just would expect more from your head coach, and so we'll see how that goes. I mean, I think that will make for an interesting Bedlam this year. Bedlam is in Norman. Oklahoma's going to host that series this year, and so not sure what that looks like at this point for when Kelly Maxwell. That's way down the road, but very interesting and intriguing comments from a head coach is something I was surprised to see. So we're about at time. I think we've had consistently anywhere from 45 to 50 folks on the line. I appreciate everybody jumping in and talking, and I think it's one of those things where I've had some discussions internally. I think it's such a long off season for college football. It's the longest off season of any sport that's out there. The shortest regular season, longest off season. So the talking season continues to kind of grow and grow and grow. It's going to be really, really nice in a couple of weeks, and then certainly next week overall for college football to kind of get kick-started with some of these games that are going to start. And we'll preview some of those. But yeah, it's going to be really nice to see what this team and all of these teams start looking like on the field, and the talking season really being over. So, like I said, thanks for joining here on our Sooner Tailgate show. Again, we will typically go on Fridays unless something goes awry where I had to flip that a little bit. Make sure you guys follow me on X or Twitter at JasonRay1. Remember our two new channels for SEC and Big 12. The SEC is youtube.com/@SECVOCFB, Voice of College Football, and Big 12 is youtube.com/@Big12VOCFB. And then again, in a couple of weeks' time, we will be live, obviously, on Friday for our pregame show, our tailgate pregame show, and then certainly on Saturday post-game to talk about everything going on Oklahoma versus Arkansas State. So bring your predictions, bring your hot takes for next week, and that's what we will discuss as we come to you live at 3 p.m. on Friday. So everybody have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. Boomer Sooner, and God bless.